All right, people are starting to join. Hi, everybody. Well, I'll keep letting people in as they join, and feel free to have cameras on or off, however you feel most comfortable. I'll just make sure that everyone's muted, if that's okay, so that we can have clear conversations amongst our panelists. My name is Marianne Wright, and I'm the founder of Sappho Events. And I'm just going to quickly introduce you to Danny in the top left corner. And Danny is our BSL interpreter. For anyone who would like to pin him to the screen, there's a way you can do that so that you can see him signing. And we've also got a live screen caption underneath. And feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I'll be around to help answer them. So without further ado, I'd love to pass you over to Jessi, who's going to be chairing our panel tonight. And just to let everyone know as well, this is going to be recorded so that we can share it with others who can't be here live with us tonight. So without further ado, over to you, Jessi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessi, and I am chairing the event tonight, and I always like to start off introductions when I'm chairing with a pun, because I'm a wheelchair user, so I'm literally chairing this event. And I'm a queer disabled performer and academic, and yeah, so that's the perspective that I'm coming from. In terms of pronouns, I use they them pronouns. And a brief audio description of me is I'm a white person in my late 20s with short, sort of half curly, half spiky brown hair and brown eyes. And I'm sitting in my powered wheelchair in a lounge which has sort of low lighting and windows in it. And I'm wearing a blue top. And I will pass over to Nikki and Bea to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Nicola and my pronouns are she and her, and I identify as a gay woman. I am a woman of colour. I have locks as a hairstyle. I would please like to thank Marianne for believing in me and making this all happen. This is an absolute dream. I'm also the disability advisory for Sappho Events, and I must say it's an amazing blessing opportunity, and I'm happy to be part of this group. Thank you.
So my name is Bea, and this is my sign name Bea. You won't be hearing my voice at the moment. That is actually the voice of the interpreter, Danny, so don't get too confused with that. My pronouns are she or they. I'm a queer person. I'm a mixed race Scottish Thai, and I'm wearing a Luxie and yak jumper. Brown hair, glasses, and I'm an actor, writer, theatre maker.
Thank you both. And I'm really excited for this chat. I'd like to reiterate Nikki's thanks for it, because yeah, having spaces like this is really important and valuable. So being asked to be involved was really lovely. And so following on from that, I'll start with the first question, which is about accessibility, given that we started off with an audio description and talking about the interpreter. That feels quite appropriate. And so we all have individual access needs that we have, and we need to navigate the world. So the question is, could we all have a chat briefly about what access needs we have and moments where we've experienced them either being met in the context of queerness and moments that they maybe haven't been met. And I don't think I'll start this time. So yeah, whoever wants to go first.
Bea is happy to start. So as a deaf person myself, I could talk for hours about this and the barriers that I've experienced. If we're talking about it linked to queer access, for me, the big thing usually is pride. And I can't access pride myself. Reason being is because the interpreter is maybe somewhere, and then I don't know if I'm trying to interact with people, I can't. It's quite difficult that way. And these queer events that we go to are accessible in Glasgow, where I am from. And these are usually small queer events, but the big kind of LGBTQIA plus events that they have running are a little bit more difficult. So in Scotland, there's rare to have an interpreter that's queer as well. So sometimes they'd be signing in a way that wasn't quite reflecting the speaker. So I find it hard to connect on that level sometimes. So yeah, that's me really summarizing the biggest issue, but yeah.
Thanks, Bea, that's really useful. Nikki, do you want to go or shall I go?
I'm happy to go. Okay, so I think it's like very important to have like a moderator present at these queer events, to obviously be there to check and protect individuals, to make sure abuse is not visible. And if so, it's dealt with as soon as possible, as there are different levels of people with special needs. Some may have mild sensory or could be submissive by default and be easily abused. I also believe it's essential to create safe spaces for individuals that may have anxieties, for those who could be new to the scene or rarely attend themselves, who would like a moderator to talk to for reassurance. I know it would help me personally. Rules about practicing safety at queer events should be recognised. General safety and ensuring our rights as citizens against abuse by other people. I believe this should be a requirement within all establishments. People have the rights to feel comfortable and safe at all times. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I think probably my experience will pick up on both of those, because I was really interested to get your perspective, Bea, on pride, because actually for me as a wheelchair user, that's one of the events that I can sort of reliably access because it's outside, and so I don't need to think about whether the venue is underground and so has lots of stairs, and people don't tend to congregate in basements that have lifts attached to them. So even if it is yeah, so that I found that really interesting, because I think that really shows how we need to remember as a community that not everyone has the same access needs, and so we need to consider the diversity within the community, as well as thinking of ourselves as a collective group that can work together to create better access. So thank you for that. And then also, Nikki, in terms of the safe spaces for anxiety and sensory overload, having said that Pride is accessible to me physically as a wheelchair user, as someone with auditory processing issues, it's not accessible. And I also have an incredibly sensitive startle reflex, thanks to the fact that I have cerebral palsy. And so any kind of loud noise, I'm jumping every time it happens. And so finding places that are indoor and accessible to me is kind of the holy grail. Yeah, I think that's my main perspective. And actually, the idea of safe spaces brings us helpfully onto the next question, unless Bea, do you have something to add quickly?
Bea just wants to weigh in, if that's okay.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, have you finished, Jessi?
Yeah.
Lovely. What you're saying about diversity and disability as well is really important. I used to work for SCUF. It was the Scottish Queer Film Festival, and they had a group of deaf and disabled artists, a forum really that we all used to engage in. And I used to feel that obviously it was wheelchair accessible, it had a quiet room, it had interpreters, lights were dimmed, they weren't so harsh, all the boxes seemed to be ticked. And I thought, if all events had something like that, where they had a forum in place that they can consult, it might not be perfect, but it'd be better, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's I think that's actually one of the reasons that I was so excited about this panel, because I think this sort of conversation does then facilitate the creation of that community and understanding. So hopefully we can connect going forward as well, which is great. But yes, so following on from that point about that forum creating that safe space for everyone, because everyone's access needs seem to be considered. The second question that Marianne and I came up with was about safe spaces and the fact that so many queer, deaf, disabled and neurodivergent people seem to connect online because for a variety of reasons, whether that be geography or needing to find PAs to support you going to an event or whatever, it's easier to connect on the internet. But if the internet is either traumatic for you or not accessible because they don't provide captions or interpretation or audio description, it isn't a safe space at all. So the question is, how can we ensure that our physical and digital spaces are safe for the queer, deaf, disabled and neurodivergent community? Who wants to go? I can go if, okay. So I brought up the dichotomy of the internet being accessible but also not accessible because I have really struggled with so much being online this year, this last 18 months really, due to the fact that certain aspects of my mental health issues interact in a not helpful way with internet environments. And so whilst as a wheelchair user, things were suddenly more physically accessible to me. Like, for instance, I could attend theatre events that I wouldn't be able to attend in real life, as it were, because the venue isn't accessible. My difficulties with communicating via the internet meant that I got really fatigued and quite re-triggered quickly. And so that was why I brought it up. And I think for me, creating a kind of hybrid atmosphere is really important going forward. And I would say that's probably for events generally, not just specific to the queer community, but providing a digital offer as well as in-person offers for people. But then within that digital offer, it has to be properly accessible and not just, oh, we've provided it online now, so wheelchair users can come. Because I know as a wheelchair user that having that visible marker of my impairment means that people think that once they've solved that, they've solved access, and that's not true. So making sure that digital spaces have captions and interpretation and audio description, and if possible, particularly for more creative events like drag nights or open mic nights, that accessibility is incorporated into the creative elements of the event rather than just being something that is on the side, I think is really important. Yeah, so I think that's my perspective. Does anyone have anything to add? Bea?
Bea, yeah. And that's right. You know, and online has been absolutely hell for me, really bad. And I think it, you know, it could just be me, but as a deaf person, you know, I know obviously you've got that visual things, but you are missing a lot of things as well in terms of the aesthetics. You know, you go from 3D to 2D. For example, I went to a deaf online queer event, and lots of deaf people were signing on different tiles, and I was like, whoa, it's just not the same, because I've also got ADHD as well. Means that, you know, 3 or 4 people signing at the same time, I'm overwhelmed, I'm out of the loop here, and it has been really difficult. But like what you've just said, some disabled people can access an online event as opposed to in person, because you're maybe not thinking about certain accessibility aspects. But it's not a one size fits all thing, is it? Unfortunately. So, you know, what has helped me online in the past is just making sure that they have safe space rules in place and they are ushered in at the beginning, and just to kind of make you more relaxed with the event itself. Maybe, you know, if you wanted to maybe just switch off the screen for 5 minutes and walk around, do a bit of pacing, incorporate that into the event as well, because, and that's what I found helped me. And obviously, it, like I said, it's not a one size fits all. It doesn't work for everyone. But I do know a lot of deaf people that have really struggled with Zoom interactions and working online. And I've been exactly the same as you, Jessi. You know, my mental health took a nosedive when the only thing I could turn to was online interaction. It just wasn't the same. And I think there is one example. I had one job actually that was online. And it was really, really bad because they never monitored the chat. So there was one person who was saying that they felt a little bit oppressed and then got a little bit emotional about that. But see, there was 4 staff members there, but they hadn't clocked it to make sure that that person was okay, which meant that, you know, I then had to leave as a result of this because it wasn't a safe space. But it's important that the chat is always monitored as well for people that are crying out for help and looking for that reassurance.
Thank you so much, Bea. Nikki? Do you have anything to add, Nikki? I'm not sure if you've frozen.
Jessi, I'll check in with Nikki now and
Okay,
I'll let you know.
great.
Well,
I'm wondering if we should just take a moment to regroup. This is a prime example of why we need safe spaces, because it's okay, whatever happens.
So I'm just in a conversation with Nikki now, and she'd just like to have a few moments to catch her breath.
Yep.
And she's going to text me her thoughts when she'd like to share them, and I can
Fabulous.
visualize her thoughts.
Fabulous. So shall we head on to the next question in that case, and we can come back when Nikki is ready? Great. So the next question again kind of follows on from points that have already been made. I think it was Bea who brought up the aesthetic of events and things, and that is the basis of the next question, which focuses on the idea that society still seems to have a very narrow, heteronormative, and cis-normative and able-centric, hearing-centric idea of beauty, which doesn't work for people who do not fit into those norms, whether that be because they're people who experience racism, or people with different bodies or different ways of communicating. And so the question is, what are some of the ways that we think we can model being more inclusive as a queer community? Because aspects of the queer community do seem to take on the more heteronormative and cis-normative dynamics around beauty that the rest of wider society presents. Yeah. So unless, of course, Nikki would like to feedback question from before, in which case we can do that whichever way round is fine.
Do you want Bea to jump in?
I think let's continue to the next question.
Okay.
Jessi, and
In that case,
and I'll when Nikki's ready to speak, I'll just let you know.
In that case, that would be great. Thank you, Bea.
Yeah, interrupt me at any point, of course, as well. So that question is massive for me, because I tick kind of all of those boxes that you mentioned, with the addition of the fact that I'm an actor, So, you know, actors focus on obviously the aesthetic, don't they? Or casting people focus on the aesthetics of an actor. So it is really quite difficult sometimes because society already has that kind of label on it, doesn't it? In terms of an example, I'm deaf. Okay, so if you're deaf, you know, it's things like, oh, you don't look stupid, or something like that. Or if you're from the Asian, if you're from an Asian community, oh, you're really weak, and lots of these things associated and these labels attached to it. And it's been quite difficult to kind of fight back against these. And because obviously in terms of the intersectionality side of things, you know, I'm deaf, I'm a person of color, I'm non-binary, I'm queer, I'm mixed race, it goes on. And what I've found useful that might be useful for fellow queers as well is you just, and it is tiring, but you just have to keep going and make sure you talk to the right person and show them your skills, showcase it so that they react to it. And you shouldn't have to prove yourself. You know, I'm here based on my skill already. Why am I going that extra mile? So that's, you know, what I do. Same in a queer space as well. You know, if you're at Pride or something like that, I have to then maybe email like back and forth with people just to get things sorted out in terms of access. But it's usually it's the emotional stamina required, and things do get better, but it's a long journey. If that makes any sense, and if that's been interpreted correctly anyway.
It absolutely makes sense, and I relate to a lot of that. I think particularly for me, because coming into my non-binary aspect of my identity has been more recent, partly thanks to lockdown introspection, I think, and having time to be with myself and realize things. That has been interesting because, yeah, like you, as an actor, I was like, gosh, what is this going to mean for me professionally? I'm already out as bi because I have been for quite some time, but what does that add to, what layer of complication does that add to my castability and or not? And so I think having that to think about does maybe enhance the issues around aesthetics, but it also maybe throws them into sharper relief in the rest of life. So you realize perhaps that it's false and that it's all just a complete social construct. So if it is, then we can dismantle that, and that's really powerful. I wouldn't say I feel like that every day. In fact, there are a lot of days where I don't feel powerful at all. But I think for me, the acknowledgement that identity is essentially a social construct in all its different layers gives a real sense of power to marginalized people, because we're like, we already knew that before you came to this point of realization. And so we're actually in a position of being able to support the rest of society who maybe don't have to think about those contracts on a more day-to-day basis. And perhaps also that's part of what has come out of COVID too, is that the whole world needed access requirements for a while. And so I found it interesting that suddenly, when it was a global thing, that things could be virtual and we could have more accessible engagement really, really quickly, because a majority of people needed it. Whereas these are things that so-called minorities have been arguing for years, and people have said, oh no, it costs too much, it's too difficult to implement. So now that we have had this global situation where people need that support, I'm just hopeful that that continues going forward, because I do think that we're already going back a little bit into the, oh yes, let's go back to normal. Well, what if you weren't living in that normal world before? What does that mean for you? Yeah, so I think that's my perspective on aesthetics and dismantling them.
Jessi, Nikki is ready to answer the question.
Great. Do you want to vocalize or text?
Can you hear me? I'm so sorry about before. Can everyone hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, I like to begin with those. So a perfect example, if you look at the modeling industry, it's more inclusive. So than before, there are more people of color, people with skin conditions, people with special needs / physical disabilities, plus size models. It has changed a lot and it has got like really better. There are positive aspects within the modeling community. If you go back to the early 90s and early noughties, there was this like heroin chic thing while you were skinny and unhealthy, looked like a adolescent, boy, basically, and that was the idea of modeling. So that was the ideal body type. And a lot of like European models were seriously like underweight until they changed the rules a couple of years ago. So you had to be kind of like healthy-ish, and if they promoted underweight models, it's still illegal and very much more stigmatized. That just means they just wanted a specific body type, but it's changed a lot. Modeling is quite whitewashed, and Aaron Rose Phillip, an Antiguan American model in 2018, she became the first Black transgender and physically disabled model to ever be featured by a big modeling agency. She has featured in many established brands and companies worldwide. So I'd like to say well done to her, and it's quite honorable to hear something like this, truly empowering. So it just goes to show that we're moving forward successfully. And yeah, it's improving drastically. Thank you.
Jessi, you're on mute.
Has that unmuted me? I'm not.
Yeah, you're not muted now. Oh, you've gone back on mute.
Oh, it's gone back on mute, Nikki.
Now?
Yeah.
Good. My Zoom seems to be massively playing up, which is very inconvenient of it. But yeah, thank you so much, Nikki. That's really useful. And as someone with CP myself who happens to be trans, I relate to the empowerment of seeing Aaron, because yeah, she's wonderful. Bea, would you like to actually, yeah, I'm just realizing.
I just wanted to add actually what to Nikki said then.
Of course.
If you may, link to modelling. And if we see more diversity in models, it might filter through into TV and film. Because very, very recently, there was a deaf Black woman who's in the Eternals film, the new Marvel film. And that's a Marvel franchise. It's a Marvel film, and my dream would be to be in a Marvel film one day. And now that she's in it, I thought that, this now opens a door for me. It's a possibility for me in the future. So having that representation on the big screen is massive. When I was small, I wanted to be an actor, but I never saw anyone like me on TV, so I gave up my acting dream for quite some time. Then I went back to it, and I'm realizing now that there are, there's people now that can see this representation, and I'm just like, yes, I'd love to be something like that. It's a role model that I never had, that the newer generation has got now. A Deaf Man in June film as well, DUNE, which meant there's more and more possibility for deaf people to be on TV, to be in the film industry. So it gives you that hope that we all really crave.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur with that. And actually, my academic work is around disability casting. So that's something that I'm really passionate about as well. I feel like we should chat separately about that, because I could go off on a tangent, kind of like you said earlier. You could talk about this for hours. That's sort of my thing. But yeah, so more specifically to this panel, the next question is actually a question for both Nikki and Bea, and wondering if you'd both be happy to chat about the intersectionality of being queer people who experience racism in more detail. So being queer and deaf, disabled or neurodivergent, but also experiencing racism.
Nikki,
Yep.
do you want to go first?
Yes, please. Is that okay? Thank
Yes.
you. Yes. So basically, I think in my life, I have experienced different degrees of racism, not just the typical like N word. You have microaggression, you have negrophobia, and it gets much more deeper and deeper. It's quite traumatic, but the brutal truth is, unfortunately, kind of like normal. The facts are that 9 out of 10 of people kind of will experience racism in their life. You don't actually know the pain, the agony, and the anger that it actually does to that person. You create anxiety, fear, depression, and self-hatred. You condition that person for the rest of their lives. And that person carries those scars forever, actually. And those scars, they literally destroy the soul. And you don't know the traumatic feelings printed in that person's spirit. The damage is done. But what I did learn is that you can't actually change the past, but you can educate yourself from it. If anyone does go through any type of discrimination, stand up for yourself, find your voice, get out of that negative situation as soon as possible. Don't ever suffer if you should suffer in silence. You're not alone. There is help out there. I feel already I have so much to deal with. You know, I have special needs, I'm gay, I'm a Black woman, hooray! But wait, there is hope. We can turn a negative into a positive picture. We can learn to embrace our Black culture. Black is beautiful. Our culture is set of values, goals, attitudes, conventions, and social practices that characterizes a particular group of people. Black people, you know, we share more than just skin color. You know, we share upbringings, background, music, religion, historical experiences, customs, family structures, the struggle, triumphs, and so much, much more. All of our stories, they do entwine, and yet the Black experiences is made up of so many different perspectives. So let's continue to be strong, beautiful, educated, and graceful. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. That's really powerful. Bea?
Yeah, and it's being intersectional as well, because I'm just trying to think of an example. So I find it, so if you're obviously, because I'm intersectional, it makes things a lot harder. For example, if I'm a part of a queer space, it's usually with white people. And if I'm in the Asian kind of community, you know, where are the queer people? So it's, you know, or if I'm in the deaf community as well, you know, there is a lot of bad racism in the deaf community, I must confess. And I think it's really linked to sign language, actually, because sign language is very visual, which means you're copying what you see. And I know I've tried to stop this many a time, because certain signs used are racist, and people might be saying, you know, it's our language, and I'm like, well, no, that's not a defense for this. It's not your language. It's colonization, and it's colonial, sorry, BSL, and it's at the same time, BSL it has no signs for a lot of queer words. So I'm one at the forefront, really being in terms of activism within the deaf community. People are always asking me, what's the sign for this? What's the sign for that? And I can help create some of these signs linked to queer, like this sign for queer. But, I'm also bi, I'm non-binary, but I've got no right to decide on like a lexical basis. So I can't, for example, like obviously asexual, I'm not asexual. So why would you ask me that question? But at the same time, there's a lot of pressure then on an asexual person to create a sign for the corresponding words. And it's so many words that don't have signs. Like pansexual, there's no sign for pansexual. And, I really hate the current sign for bisexual, which is this, because that is very cis. It's a cis sign, because it means you like a man or a woman. And I'm like, no, that's not the case. The old sign for gender used to be this, gender. So I then had to kind of educate people in, no, we need to change this, because sign language is also very like binary, man, woman, and I'm like, no, there are extra layers that we need to consider as well. So yeah, I've been an activist on that front.
Thank you, Bea. And actually following on from that, the last question is a question for you and me about being intersectional people who experience either deafness or being disabled, and also are grappling with gender identity. So that is a really, really useful jumping off point to start. I think if you wanted to continue where you left off, that would be great, and then I'll come in.
And I think that's why so many deaf people hate the word kind of coming out, but a lot of deaf people come out too late in their life, because if you've not got that sign language, if you've not got that lexicon, how can you express yourself? And like you, I came out as non-binary through lockdown as well. The reason being that 3 of my friends are deaf non-binary, and they were creating signs and making videos that were informative, saying non-binary was this for this reason. And then I started to kind of really connect with this, and I thought, you know what, that could actually be me as well. And there was one person called RuPaul from RuPaul Drag Race, has 2 non-binary people as well. So, and there was just a discussion, and I was like, this is going on, and this is going on, and it's all resonating with me. Yes, I'm non-binary. So you've got representation here on TV, and then I've got the language that I can access here within the deaf community as well that are talking about it. So I think deaf people, it's getting that access to information. We're not talking about physical space or whatever. It's literally just accessing information and having that accessibility to communication. And if they haven't got that, how can they access this queer stuff? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, and it's something that I have to think about a lot too, in a slightly different way, but similar, in that the majority of my life revolves around other people supporting me, and So if those other people who are supporting me, my personal assistants, aren't part of the community, then I need to work out, am I going to come out to you in the interview, or am I going to be comfortable going to a queer event with you because you're not part of the community? Or at the same time, do I want to decide to only have queer and trans PAs because I feel safer? But then there's this difficulty of finding enough people, because finding PAs is as much of a interesting game as it is to find interpreters sometimes, and so we can't always choose who we have supporting us because we need somebody to be there for a particular event on a particular day. And so, yeah, that luxury of choice, I think, is an interesting one. But I think also for me, what you were saying about the different discourses coming together and making you realize that, oh, this is me too, and this is why I've been feeling the way that I've been feeling. And I think for me, because I'm a wheelchair user and needed quite a lot of support with personal care and other physical things, I think I have quite a distanced relationship with my body. And so I thought that the distance that I felt was down to being disabled, and didn't necessarily relate to other things like gender and sexuality, although I've known for quite a while that I was bi. So I think that was a really interesting revelation for me, because I was like, oh no, it's not that I have, what I've been feeling so far was actually me projecting internalized ableism, because my distance from my body was something that people had sort of said, well, obviously you have a medical need for support, and so you're distancing yourself from your body because of that. But actually realizing that I come under the trans umbrella and identify as non-binary has helped me to have a much better relationship with my body. And so now I realize that actually the narratives around distance that came from me being disabled from birth, and so not having a good relationship with my body because it didn't work, in quotation marks, in the way that the rest of society wanted it to work, wasn't true. It was actually something around gender identity that I needed to make sense of. So I think it's a different kind of not having the language. And obviously, as someone who can speak and has multiple friends who can't speak, whether that be because they're disabled or deaf, I know that I have a deep luxury to be able to communicate as and when I want to. And that's actually something that I'm acutely aware of, because even if I am having difficulty with personal assistance, at least I can tell them relatively easily that I'm having these difficulties without having to engage yet another person to interpret for me. But yeah, so I think a more metaphorical kind of finding language for me, I really, really relate to that. Thank you so much, both of you. We've come to the end of the questions that we have. We only have 10 minutes left now, but so if anyone has said anything in the chat, Marianne, it would be great to know, or if not, if anyone has anything else to say that I haven't brought up.
Jessi, there are a few questions in the chat. First of all, I'll reiterate Scarlett's thoughts. Scarlett had to leave us because they had enough screen time. and they left their handle on the chat if anyone would like to see. Scarlett is a poet. Scarlett said, "Thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and for creating a space to do so. It is comforting to know that there are people fighting similar corners to me. I found the signing and learning that there is no sign for pansexual etc. super informative, and would love to learn more about the sign lexicon." Emmy said, "This is a hugely thought-provoking discussion. Thank you. I could listen to you talk all day." I agree. Paul Michaels has said in the chat, a question for Bea. "I'm a hearing researcher who is a fluent BSL user, and I have undertaken research and published findings with a deaf lesbian on the topic of young deaf LGBT people. Ideally, there would be a deaf researcher in the room, but if that's not possible, thinking about your access to interpreter provision for research, what are your views on having an interpreter who is known to you or not? I'm thinking about how happy are you to share personal information for the purposes of deaf LGBT research with interpreters you may work with in other areas of your life."
Sorry, can we just read that? Can you just summarize that again, Marianne?
Yes. The question is about how do you feel about having an interpreter who knows you or doesn't know you, in terms of how happy you are to share personal information when you're talking to a researcher who's researching LGBT people who are deaf?
So are we talking just in the context of research then, or generally speaking?
I think Paul, because Paul is a researcher, he's speaking specifically.
So yeah, I think it means, I could be wrong, if you were to meet Paul and you want to talk about your personal life, would you be happy to use an interpreter you know or interpreter you don't know? Which do you prefer? Bea saying that they would rather use an interpreter that they know, basically whether or not the interpreter is going to well represent Bea, and an interpreter that we've worked with plenty of times before will already know how Bea signs and certain things about Bea already, so you've got that common shared knowledge already. But that's just me, not everyone's the same, of course.
Thanks, Bea. Mustafa has asked, "I'm wondering what we can do more. What can we do more as able-bodied queer allies?"
That's a big question.
And Bea's agreeing.
But I think the fact that you've asked the question is a great start. Because a lot of people would just help without asking what's useful. So yeah, I'm not sure I have anything concrete to suggest, but the fact that you're asking is really useful and being a good ally already.
And Bea just wants to add as well, if you can, educate yourself first and foremost. And it's saying, for example, like Black Lives Matter, in terms of that movement as an example, we try and maybe just share stories. I mean, I'm not Black myself, but I've been told that I should be sharing about Black people on Twitter, and how I should be talking about my experience. But no, Twitter, I share their stories. It's their voice that I want to get out there and encourage. And it's the same for deaf stories as well. I try and encourage deaf storytellers to talk about their experiences. I try not to be so self-centric, and just share people's stories that people can then see.
Wonderful, thank you. We have quite a few questions. A lot of people have thanked you for your times, especially Ab said that it was their most enjoyable Zoom to date. Hannah has a question from the audience. I'm going to summarize it, Hannah, if you don't mind, just for time. Hannah was wondering if you have any comments on accessibility and ableism in a dating context, because Hannah finds that their access needs can feel very prohibitive, and the conversations may be taking over by communicating their needs, and you end up with a best friend rather than flirting. And so they wondered if you had thoughts on that.
Relatable, firstly, and secondly, I have difficulty with like online dating and stuff, but when I have ventured into that world, I have learned to be quite upfront in my profile. So maybe being upfront in a dating context, regardless of whether it's online or in person, is good. I know it takes a lot to get to the place where you feel comfortable being upfront, but yeah, if people don't want to take all of you, then they don't deserve any of you. So yeah.
And B concurs. And so texting as well is usually absolutely fantastic, and then you meet them in person, it's just like, oh, access. So these experiences are a little bit opposite, but yeah, putting on the profile saying, no, I am deaf, I am this and that, so they know what to expect then. Yet sometimes, you know, I'm just trying to think, swiping left or right. I rarely do match with people, but you know, I have met my partner and we've been together for 5 years now. So I know that they're the right person because they learned to sign before meeting me. Because my ex way back when didn't know how to sign, and I thought that we broke up maybe because of that. Because there was that communicational aspect that we were struggling with. So my view is, like you said, Jessi, it's best to be upfront, so that you're more likely then to meet the right person. But that's just me. Yeah, we like to filter out the bad ones first.
Nikki, do you have anything to add?
I'll come back to you with that question, please.
I think we're kind of coming towards time, but we can give space for Nikki to answer if that's useful, if everyone's happy to stay on.
Yeah, of course.
But also no pressure, Nikki.
So Nikki, the question was about dating, and if there are ways that you feel there are barriers to dating when you have additional needs. And Hannah said that sometimes it seems like your conversation gets filled up with questions about potentially your disability, and you don't get to do much flirting, for example.
I think it's really important to, like, when I do date people, I always literally address who I am. Like, you know, I am, you know, a person with additional needs, dyslexia and dyspraxia. And most people are very understanding, compassionate, and most people are like, you know, what is dyspraxia? And most of the times people like educate me, and I'm happy to, like, you know, obviously just articulate, yeah, this is, you know, where I'm coming from and my struggles and about my histories. And I think in the past, though, I have met people that were dismissive and were quite, you know, horrible, and I just said goodbye to them. But I think really for me, how it's always worked, and it's like it's always materialized, that I always was very proud and all this, though. I always said that, listen, you know, I am this person, things have to be taken nice and slow. I might not understand basic things, or could you repeat that again? And yeah, I mean, like, I am open-minded. I can date people, you know, regardless of their conditions or not. But I'm inclusive, and I like to think that I could just date anyone. But to make things a bit more easier, it works out if I can find someone suitable with me that, you know, understands, you know, people with special needs. But I'm very, like, honest about it, and I like to think that I can just literally just, like, you know, be myself, be comfortable, and, you know, just say as it is. Like, you know, I can't rush into anything, and things have to be taken like in pace and time. And majority of the times it's effective, and I've had successful relationships, and the good and the bad, the ugly, but that's how it is. And yeah, it's all a journey for me, actually. I'm still growing and evolving, and yeah.
I just have two more little comments to share from the chat. Thank you so much, Nikki, for your response.
Bea's just saying that she completely agrees with everything you said, Nikki, as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Jules said that said thank you to everybody, and that they love the idea of a national forum like Squiff had, that proactively reached out to organizations and events to push forward greater accessibility in queer spaces. And then they asked, anyone know who has the time, energy, and resources to organize that?
That is a very good question. Finding the spoons is always a struggle, isn't it? Sorry, I shouldn't use metaphors. The spoon theory, in case people don't know, is a way of explaining chronic illness and disability and how energy works. But yeah, so that, I would say that's a very good question. But maybe if we can all work together and share out our spoons and resources, then maybe we can make it happen collectively. Because yeah, I think the intersections of our communities are very good at collective organization. So maybe Sappho can spearhead it.
Absolutely, Jules. I'll put it on my list. I think there are a lot of lessons we've already learned tonight, and the value of making events accessible, because access, as Jessi says, we all have access needs. So we all start from a place of needing things, and we can help serve the community better. There's so much that we can do, but I will happily take on part of the baton, Jules.
Okay.
I just wanted to just pass on one more thing, which was from Maria. And Maria said, it's not a question, but thank you very much to all the panelists and to you, Danny. And she hopes everyone has a great week.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jessi, for sharing so wonderfully. And thank you to Nikki, and thank you to Bea for being on the panel. I'm so thrilled that this was recorded so that many more people can access it in the future. And I want to thank you, Danny, for being our interpreter tonight. And thank you all for your brilliant questions and engaging. I know that it's been a wonderful hour that I've had to share with you all. And yeah, just thank you all and have a great night.
You too.
And thank you from Bea as well.
Very nice to meet everyone. Thank you.
Bye bye, everyone.